I'm predicting a new look for the Mizzou football defense in 2025. I'll tell you why right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, of course, want to talk about some Mizzou hoops, including former Missouri basketball star Keyon Dooling talking about the NBA's need for a white American-born star. I promise this segment is going to be as controversial as it might seem, but it is going to be interesting, so hang in there until the end of the program. But I do want to talk about Mizzou football right now because I have to say I've been thinking about the structure of Missouri football's defense next year quite a bit. And I think Missouri cornerbacks, hey, it's great that Stephen Hall, a transfer portal corner from Washington State, good grab by Missouri, but for the most part, most of the same guys are still coming back. Toriano Pride, Nick DeLoach, of course, Drayden Norwood as well. So really, I think Missouri is counting on development at that position. And before last season, Missouri had really leaned on a lot of man-to-man defense and aggressive man-to-man defense. Made a lot of sense when you've got two NFL caliber corners in Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams-Drain. Then I think this past offseason, a new defensive coordinator for Missouri, of course, Blake Baker, goes on to LSU in the lateral move. Go ahead, say it for me. There you go. Thank you very much for finishing my sentence. I knew you loved me, absolutely. But of course, Corey Batoon, the new Missouri defensive coordinator, I think for the most part kept things pretty simple in terms of the transition last year for the Missouri defense. So I think you still saw a good bit of man-to-man defense for the Tigers. So what I'm thinking is this year that while, at least compared to the front four, I think the corners are still a bit of a question mark, I think you'll see more zone defense in the back end for Missouri this season. I think that's a real adjustment that Missouri can make, and I think it's one that they should make, to be quite honest with you. Not only because the corners are maybe somewhat suspect, hey, go out and prove me wrong next year, all of you guys, if you're saying they don't believe in us. That's a common refrain these days among modern athletes. By all means, clip this out with Final Cut Pro, share it all over social media, and use me as your whipping boy if that's what it takes for the Missouri corners to just be tremendous next year. Nobody would be happier than that for me. But really, to the point, I just think the Missouri front four has the potential to be great. I think it'll at least be good at the very least. That Missouri pass rush. I've heard enough people whose opinions I trust, not just the scoutmaster, Brian Smith, by the way, who loves Damon Wilson, the transfer from Georgia on the edge. But I've heard a lot of other people praising Damon Wilson's name as well. A lot of high hopes at that position. Zion Young was productive last year. Eddie Kelly was productive last season. And speaking of potential edge rushers from Georgia, well, Darius Smith was expected to be a big part of that Missouri pass rush last season before he suffered a season-ending ACL injury early in camp. So with him having a full year to recover by fall camp, I think there's a lot of options, a lot of interesting options there for Missouri at the front four, and I haven't even talked about the inside. I think Chris McClellan is as good a player as there is on the entire roster, just for example. And Missouri has done very well, I think. Al Davis, the interior line coach there on the defensive side, has done as good a job, I think, as anybody on the staff of developing guys, whether it's out of the high school ranks or out of the transfer portal. So I'm feeling really good about the front four, better about the pass rush than I did last season. That could be a real strength for Missouri. The linebackers they got in the portal are promising to be veteran, experienced players at this level as well. So I think you take a little bit more pressure off the back end, and you play some more zone next season. I think that's an adjustment that if I were Eli Drinkwitz and Corey Batoon, I would strongly consider making. And when I look at the Missouri football schedule next season, just playing a simple game of easier or harder. In other words, is this game on the Missouri schedule, is it easier or harder, specifically the SEC schedule, just in terms of basic first look perception here? And it turns out I went through all of the SEC schedule just first glance. Don't even think about it. Is it going to be easier or harder next season? Well, turns out all of my perceptions were based on, they all flipped because every game on the Missouri SEC schedule flipped from home versus away. And really that is about it. I will say though, I am more bullish on Oklahoma and Auburn than I was last season. So to some extent, that has my call on them being a harder game than last year. But of course, being in Jordan-Hare Stadium and then in Norman, respectively, has a lot to do with that perception. But even Alabama, though, at home, I think for Missouri is an easier game than it was last season. I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm pretty bullish on Alabama next season too, but simply based on perception. I think a lot of people are ready to start dancing on the Crimson Tide's grave already for the Kalen DeBoer era. I understand that. I really do, after a 15-year run of Nick Saban that was nothing like we've ever seen before in the history of college football. So, of course, naturally, people get tired of seeing Alabama winning. I just wouldn't start counting those chickens quite yet, me personally. But at the same time, the point in really this whole exercise is making me realize that, yes, while Missouri has some definite question marks heading into next season, well, even teams like South Carolina that a lot of my colleagues are saying are bullish on or are expecting a breakout type season. Well, there's been a lot of movement in the portal up front for South Carolina as well. I think the point here is that in this era of the SEC in which we're currently in, it's probably the most parity you're going to see in the SEC maybe since Missouri has entered the league. I'll say that. My outlook for 2025, I think this is more jumbled in terms of I could see this team finishing in the top half, the low half, maybe even dead last versus, hey, maybe they could have a surprisingly good season. There's a lot of those type of teams right now, including Missouri, quite honestly. There's a case for Missouri to be really good next season, especially if that pass rush is as good as I'm hoping that it is. But there's also a case that Missouri, without Brady Cook, without Luther Burden, with a bunch of offensive linemen to replace, including Armand Mimbu, maybe the hottest name in the NFL draft right now, there's definitely a case to be made that Missouri is going to have a transition season. It may be a little bit down next year. I'm just saying the possibilities are pretty endless in the SEC right now. So while the parity in college football right now, it's not really as though, the mid-majors, that type of deal. It's not like they're getting stronger. In fact, they're probably getting weaker at the expense of teams like Missouri and Texas Tech, the sort of traditional non-blue bloods of the major conferences. That's where you're seeing the parity actually happen. And talking about basketball, how important is the Oklahoma game tomorrow for Missouri? Well, if the Tigers are going to get a double bye in the SEC tournament, quite simply, it's a must win. So let's talk some hoops coming up. But first, for you blue-collar men out there, get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources on the latest product information to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of more than 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Now, the odds say Missouri is likely to go 1-1 here over its final two games, but I'm feeling optimistic. I'm saying the Tigers are going to win its final two ball games, and I think going 12-6 in the SEC this year is important. At least it's important to me as a fan because this has been such a strong league this year. I think to go 12-6 just solidifies that Missouri indeed had a great season this year. But I will say a double bye, a top four seed, that is, in the SEC tournament, is looking unlikely at this point, but certainly not impossible. For example, Tennessee is in fourth right now. Missouri is in fifth place. Of course, Tennessee has a victory over Missouri, but of course, if Tennessee were to lose its final two games, Missouri were to win its final two games, well, Missouri would overtake the Vols. So Tennessee at Ole Miss and versus South Carolina at home for Senior Day doesn't seem like two Tennessee losses are terribly likely in the final two games there, to say the least. Alabama, on the other hand, well, Missouri a couple games behind the Tide, but, of course, has the tiebreaker over Alabama with its win at Mizzou Arena. And the Tide have a really tough finishing schedule. Home against Florida on Saturday, a top five Gator unit there. And, of course, at Auburn, the team many consider the best in the entire country. But, and here's the but here, if Alabama were to beat Florida, well, then we'll have to root for Ole Miss in Gainesville the next game because, well, those are your three paths, essentially. One of those three teams needs to lose its final two games for Missouri to have a chance. And, of course, the Tigers would have to win its final two as well. So either Tennessee, Alabama, or Florida is going to have to lose its final two games for Missouri to possibly get a double bye. And really, the most likely of those kind of seems like it's probably Alabama, believe it or not. Playing Florida at home and then at Auburn, that's a toughie. So that if Alabama could somehow lose to Florida, well, the path starts to open up a little bit for Missouri. Now, of course, if the Tigers lose in Norman, then this entire discussion has been moot. And another reason winning those final two games is important for Missouri, regardless of the outcome of the SEC tournament seeding, is that the Tigers seem to be right on the cusp of a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. And if you've been listening to this program lately, you know I think that's an important threshold for Missouri to keep. It just their odds of advancing far in the tournament, to me, a 4 versus a 5 and worse really is a big difference. And you look at the Associated Press poll, you probably, of course, saw this yesterday, but the Tigers down 1 spot to 15th in the AP and 3 spots to 19th in the coaches' poll. So we can quibble with a few spots here or there if you like, but I think the main point here is that that's pretty reflective, that range there of about where Missouri is. They're either right on the cusp or right on the bubble, let's say, of being a top 4 seed in March Madness. So I think if you're Missouri, that's why winning these final 2 games is so important. And we'll see, we'll just have to see how important these conference tournaments are in terms of at-large seeding to the committee here in a few weeks. And going back to that Mizzou-Alabama game, of course, you remember when Dennis Gates got on the microphone in the last few seconds in a dead ball and implored the Missouri fans to not rush the court. Well, I had some people online I noticed were not really buying the idea that, saving $500,000 is a big deal. In fact, one UConn fan I got into an argument with was going, "Oh, spare me $500,000. The SEC revenue share for Missouri alone is, $30 million or whatever the number is." I don't have that right off the top of my hand. But the point here is that as much as this guy likes to pretend that $500,000 is not real money, he didn't say $300 billion. He said $30 million. Okay. By the way, $500,000, that's a good college basketball player in terms of NIL money these days. And Missouri this past year basically decided it would rather save $400,000 than start the women's basketball coaching search early, because, to be quite honest, the Robin Pingeton resignation here, her moving on, we've known that this was going to be Robin Pingeton's last season for quite a while. This has been the worst kept secret in all of women's basketball, without a doubt. But the point here really is that if Missouri is basically willing to take an L this season, to punt on this season of women's basketball, you do have to wonder if they're ever going to take this sport seriously. And if you're a women's basketball fan, you do have to wonder, if not now, then when? Because if Missouri basketball doesn't commit to if Missouri's athletic department does not commit to women's basketball to at least some degree, I'm not sure when it will. And the reason I emphasize some degree is because all I really think this program needs is the right coach. I genuinely believe that, because I don't know that NIL is necessarily the difference. Okay, sure, at the top 5, top 10 levels of women's basketball, I'm sure that NIL matters. I don't know if that's what Missouri women's basketball fans are wanting or expecting. And more importantly, I think they can draw more fans with a pleasing brand of basketball, with likable players, and most importantly, with a likable star type of coach who can bring people into the stands and bring, most importantly, recruits into the program. And you just have to wonder, considering Missouri has only had 3 coaches in its entire history, and it's not been a very good history either, you do just have to wonder, if you're somebody like Molly Miller, you're an up-and-comer, is this a program, even if you're from that home state, is this a program you're willing to commit to if the Missouri Athletic Department isn't willing to commit to it? Again, I understand the pecking order here. I understand that obviously football is the big dog, and men's basketball is clearly ahead of women's basketball and every other sport in the athletic department. No arguments there. But because of the men's basketball department and the facilities that it has, Mizzou Arena, everything else, to me, that's an easier sell than, say, trying to revamp the baseball program, which may need a whole bunch of new investments in terms of a new stadium, new workout facilities, whatever it might be. Women's basketball, on the other hand, I really believe that all you just need is the right coach, and suddenly that program may take off without nearly as much investment as I think it would take in, for example, Missouri men's baseball, despite the fact that there is some history there. Obviously, a national championship back in the 1950s. But to me, actually making some degree of investment in women's basketball makes a lot more sense, because it's simply an easier putt. And if you're a sports fan, especially a basketball fan, you've no doubt heard the talk about the decline in NBA ratings lately. Well, Keyon Dooling, the former Missouri point guard and NBA player as well, says we need an American-born white player, in my opinion. Well, I think Keyon is half right, so I'll explain why coming up right after these quick words. So as somebody who's followed basketball for many decades now, I can think all the way back to the 1990s, hearing this notion that seemingly anytime there's a bit of a blip in the NBA's overall popularity. There's this idea that, darn it, we need a white guy. I've heard this for a long time. I really have. And by the way, I'm just not sure that history supports this particular argument. And by the way, I'm not offended by this notion that Keyon Dooling has put forth by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a completely fair topic to talk about, and so I will, by golly. But, I think there are lots of subtle needle movers in the sport. By the way, of course, there are tons of people that matter. Otherwise, there would only just be a handful of guys who make the multi-millions of dollars. But there are lots of people who matter and create value. It's just not as necessarily obvious on a spreadsheet. You see, what I'm saying is there are obvious people who, when they are on the court, well, they move the needle in very, very obvious ways. Recently, Caitlin Clark may be the first female basketball player to fit that bill in America. And now Keyon Dooling might say, well, that's because she's an American white girl. And I'll give you that. She is an American white girl, no doubt about that. But she's a lot more than just that basic categorization. And she's far from the first prominent white American player to come through college basketball in the WNBA. Clearly, there's something more to Caitlin than just that. And I would say the same thing for Larry Bird as well, who, along with Magic Johnson, by the way, a lot of people think saved the NBA. Well, there is no doubt that those two together were massive needle movers for the NBA and the sport in general. And they were the two biggest ever until Michael Jordan came around. And then when Michael Jordan retired, Kobe Bryant was able to carry that torch a little bit for sure. And yet once Kobe kind of wound down, and the point is there's been moments where you're going, wait, who is the next star in the league and all this stuff? Then LeBron comes around. Stephen Curry comes around. And I think right now what you're seeing in the NBA is who is the next guy? I think that's the big question, because those guys like LeBron and Steph, well, they're aging, quite honestly. So who is going to be the next star? Well, right now it's Caitlin Clark, but I'm talking about in the men's game. I think sometimes the NBA overthinks it. The people who follow the sport overthink it a little bit, because you really cannot manufacture these types of stars. And really, back to Keyon Dooling's original point, is that, well, the NBA basically needs a white American star. I think what I just laid out to you there is that all of those guys that I laid out, Magic, Bird, MJ, LeBron, Steph, Kobe, what do they all have in common? Well, it's not that they're white, obviously. It's that they're American. So Keyon Dooling is on to something there. You look at the best players in the league right now, the younger guys, like at least younger relatively compared to LeBron and Steph Curry, those type of guys. We're talking Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, all these guys, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander even, who's from Canada. None of these guys, while they all are massive stars in their local markets, just like Dirk Nowitzki was before Luka in Dallas, these international guys are massive stars in their local markets. They're never, correct me if I'm wrong, has there ever been an international NBA player that has truly crossed over into national stardom in the same way that LeBron James or Michael Jordan did, or Magic Johnson, or Larry Bird, or even going back to Julius Erving, or even Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, a couple guys who changed the trajectory of the league all the way back in the 1960s. I just think that the white-black thing, I just don't know that history really supports that particular argument. But history does support that if you're going to move the needle nationally in America, well, you better be American, by golly. I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm not saying that the international guys are hated or anything like that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Again, in their home markets, the Greek Freak, Giannis, he's incredibly popular in Milwaukee. The people of Dallas are ready to riot right now because Luka Doncic got traded to the Lakers. So it's really not a it's not a white-black thing, But strangely enough, it is an American thing. That's for sure. It certainly seems to be that way. Maybe someday we'll get an exception to that. But right now, the biggest stars in NBA basketball, for the most part, the best players, I should say, are international guys. And even in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, for example, let's say he grew up an hour farther south in Detroit. I just don't know that he's suddenly the face of the league either, being a kind of low-key guy who plays basketball in Oklahoma City for as great at the sport as he is. Once again, on my favorite topic of what makes a star, I don't think we're ever going to totally figure it out. That's probably why it is one of my favorite topics. What can I say? I like a moving target like the stock market, which has been moving all over the place lately, hasn't it? But hey, thanks for not moving off of this podcast. Thanks for joining me and making Locked On Mizzou your first listen today. And for your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On College Basketball to get yourself prepared for March Madness. Again, Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So, I am John Miller. See you next time right here on Locked On Mizzou.